Hello, my name is Orion Dubois. I'm 27 years old, a woman living in Bruges, Belgium, a city where glistening canals wind through cobblestone streets and time-worn red brick buildings. Bruges is postcard perfect, with its ancient bridges and the scent of warm waffles drifting through the air. But don't let the fairy tale charm fool you, this city knows how to keep its secrets. I work at the local university library, tucked away among dusty shelves, sorting old books and medieval manuscripts by hand. It's not glamorous. Pay is barely enough to scrape by. But I love the quiet murmur of forgotten stories whispering from the pages, as if the past is reaching out in fragments only I can hear. The only problem? My family thinks I'm a total failure. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. My family, the Dubois clan, is a loud, extravagant crowd. They live in a world of lavish parties, fine wines, and luxury handbags. My father, Marcel Dubois, is a real estate tycoon with an empire stretching from Bruges to Brussels. My uncle Hugo is always by his side, dressed in expensive suits and flashing the kind of slick, rehearsed smile that belongs in a cologne commercial. My cousins, Victor, Camille, and Elise, are constantly busy flaunting their latest trips to Paris, their Swiss watches, or their brand new apartments in the heart of the city. And me? I'm the girl in a worn-out sweater, pedaling an old bicycle through the rain-soaked streets of Bruges, who prefers flipping through dusty novels over talking stock portfolios or real estate ventures. The family gatherings, usually held at my father's opulent villa with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, I'm more of a background prop than a guest. I'd be the one quietly pouring water or clearing plates while the rest of the table erupted in laughter over inside jokes and stories I was never part of. Orion, what do you even do all day in that library? Camille once sneered over a glass of Merlot. Stack books? Such a 21st century profession. They all burst into laughter like I was the evening's entertainment. I didn't argue. I just smiled politely, nodded, and returned to the kitchen with the empty wine glasses. There was no point. In that world, I had no voice that mattered. But there was one place where I never felt like an outsider. My grandparents' old wooden cottage, tucked away just outside Bruges, near the edge of the Ardennes forest. My grandfather, Gustave Laurent, or as I called him, Grandpa Gus, was a tall man, though age had bowed his back and turned his hair stark white. His hands were thin and veiny, yet somehow steady as he held either a tattered book or a cup of strong black coffee. He always wore the same threadbare sweater and a faded flat cap that seemed older than me. Grandma Colette was the gentlest soul I'd ever known. She had a warm smile that could soften even my worst days and eyes filled with quiet patience. Their home smelled of damp wood and old stories, a place suspended in time like a sepia-toned photograph. The world might have moved on, but inside those walls I felt safe, anchored. To the rest of my family, they were barely a footnote. Grandpa Gus was just a poor old man, clinging to memories in a house no one cared about. They saw his cottage as a useless relic, and the small plot of land surrounding it as nothing more than a weed-choked patch that would be worth something only if bulldozed and redeveloped. I remember one particular evening, another exhausting dinner party at my father's villa. My father raised his wine glass and chuckled. That old man won't be leaving anything behind. Don't expect a thing. Uncle Hugo, never one to miss a jab, smirked and added, although if someone bought that land and built a resort or a golf course, it might fetch a few million euros. Their laughter echoed off the marble walls. I sat there frozen, hands clenched under the table. Tight knot formed in my chest, not just from their words but from the casual cruelty in them, how easily they erased people who no longer fit into their world of assets and acquisitions. To them, Grandpa Gus and Grandma Colette were liabilities, ghosts of an outdated life. But to me, they were the only people who ever really saw me, not as a failure, not as a disappointment, but as someone who belonged. To me, Grandpa Gus was an entire world. Every weekend, I would ride my bicycle out to the cottage, balancing a paper bag filled with croissants or picking up medication for him and Grandma Colette. It was my small ritual, and I never missed a visit, not for rain, not for tired legs, not even for work deadlines. I loved sitting beside the fireplace, where the flames cast flickering shadows across the wooden walls, and listening to him speak about wars, buried secrets, and the forgotten corners of history covered in dust and silence. He had a passion for history, especially the Cold War. I often brought him books from the library, tales of MI6, the KGB, and espionage missions buried in classified files. He would turn the pages slowly, reverently, as if the weight of those secrets still lingered between the lines. "Orion," he once said, his eyes lit with a curious fire, "this world is full of secrets. Some people live their whole lives, and no one ever knows they changed the course of history." Grandma Colette, sitting in her favorite chair, would smile and pretend to scold him. "Don't fill her head with all your spy stories, Gustave." But I knew she was only pretending. She adored the way he told stories. And so did I. Those evenings were more than just visits, they were an escape. From the glossy coldness of my father's villa, from the biting remarks of my cousins, from the hollow smiles and champagne toasts, the cottage, everything slowed down. Time breathed. My mother, Isabel, was the only person in the Dubois family who never made fun of me. She was quiet, her light brown hair always neatly pinned into a bun, her eyes carrying a sorrow that never fully left. In the Dubois household, she was like a shadow, eclipsed by my father and Uncle Hugo, barely heard in the noise of their world. She never defended me in front of them, never raised her voice or challenged their cruelty. But when we were alone, just the two of us, she would take my hand gently and whisper, "Orion, you don't have to be like them. Just be yourself. That's enough." Those rare moments with her were precious. In them, I felt her trying, silently, almost desperately, to shield me from a world that had crushed her long ago. She was stuck in it, unable to leave. But maybe she believed I still had a chance. Then, everything changed on a cold autumn night. I had cycled out to the cottage as usual, my scarf wrapped tightly around my neck, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. Grandpa was sitting by the fireplace, a worn hardcover book resting on his knees. But something about his gaze was different that evening. His eyes were deeper, more focused, as if he were trying to see something beyond me. Or inside me. Grandma Colette had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache, leaving just the two of us by the crackling fire. The room was quiet, except for the occasional snap of burning wood. "Orion," he said suddenly, his voice low and weighty, "if there was a secret that could change the way you see this entire family, would you want to know it?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. I tried to laugh it off, lightening the tension. "You're telling spy stories again, Grandpa?" But he didn't smile. The glow from the fire danced across his face, casting soft shadows in the creases of his skin. His eyes, usually warm and twinkling, were now steady, unreadable. He wasn't teasing. "I'm not joking, Orion," he said quietly but firmly. "There are things I've kept hidden for a lifetime. But maybe it's finally time you knew everything." A hush fell between us. I stared at him, unsure whether I was afraid or simply confused. I had heard countless stories from him, some mysterious, others fantastical, but this felt different. This wasn't about foreign agents or encrypted letters. This wasn't history. This was personal. And it was about my family. I looked into his eyes again, trying to read the meaning behind his words. The way he held himself. The slight tremble in his hand as he closed the book on his lap. Something was shifting. Something real. I swallowed, the warmth from the fire doing little to calm the chill that suddenly crept up my spine. What kind of secret?" I asked, almost in a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the flames, as if searching for the right way to begin, as if weighing the cost of what he was about to reveal. Side wind rustled through the trees. A branch tapped against the window, soft and insistent. Inside, the silence grew heavy, thick with unspoken truths. And I knew, deep in my gut, that after this night, nothing would ever be the same again. His words sent a chill through me. I wanted to ask more, to press him, to understand what he meant, but he shook his head gently and placed his hand on my shoulder. "You're the only one I trust, Orion. Remember that." That night, as I rode my bike back through the winding streets of Bruges, his words echoed in my mind. A secret? One that could change the way I saw my entire family? I tried to convince myself that he was just old, maybe confused, maybe sentimental. But deep down, I knew Grandpa Gus never said anything without meaning it. Autumn passed quickly in Bruges. The streets I took to visit my grandparents were soon buried under golden leaves, soft and damp beneath my tires. But as the season changed, so did Grandpa's health. I began to notice the difference. His steps were slower, his voice more strained. One afternoon, I arrived to find him slumped in his chair by the fireplace, pale and struggling to breathe. His chest rose and fell with a heavy effort, and a faint wheeze accompanied every exhale. Grandma Colette, her silver hair pulled back tightly, stood nearby, hands trembling as she poured tea into a chipped porcelain cup. "He's been coughing all week," she said, trying to sound calm, but her voice cracked just enough to betray her fear. "The doctor says it's pneumonia, but he won't go to the hospital." I knelt beside him, taking his hand gently. "Grandpa, you have to see a doctor," I pleaded. "I'll take you. Please." But he only shook his head, offering a soft, weary smile. "I'm old, Orion. I've had my time. I just want to be here with your grandmother and with you." After that, I visited more often, sometimes staying the whole day, even skipping work when I needed to. I brought his medication, cooked soup, helped Grandma clean, and sat by the fire trying to keep everything as normal as possible. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the fire cast long shadows across the cottage walls, he looked at me and asked, "Orion, have you ever wondered if a person could live 2 lives?" I blinked. 2 lives? He nodded, eyes fixed on the flames. One life that everyone sees, and another known only to them. Sometimes there are things so deeply buried that if they ever came to light, they could destroy everything. His voice was quiet, but there was a weight in every word that made my skin prickle. I stared at him, unsure of what to say. Was this the secret he had hinted at? Was he speaking about himself? But before I could ask, he closed his eyes and leaned back, as if the effort of saying even that had drained him. In the days that followed, I continued to care for him. The rest of my family remained oblivious or indifferent. My father was busy as always, jumping from one real estate deal to the next, flying back and forth between Brussels and Amsterdam. Uncle Hugo appeared in the newspapers almost weekly, celebrated for his latest land acquisitions. My cousins? They were lost in parties and luxury, parading their new cars on social media, wrapped in designer scarves, too self-absorbed to remember the man who had once held them as infants. Thanksgiving came that year with a biting wind and gray skies. No one showed up at the cottage except for me and my mother. We brought roasted turkey wrapped in foil, a box of gingerbread cookies, and our quiet presents. The 3 of us sat around the old wooden table, its surface scarred by time and memory, and listened as Grandpa Gus spoke about the past, his childhood in the countryside, how he met Grandma during a rainy spring in 1953, the night the Berlin Wall fell and he stayed up listening to the radio. He coughed more now, long fits that left him breathless. But he still smiled between them, his spirit refusing to dim even as his body weakened. My mother sat beside me, silent as always. But at one point I felt her eyes on me. I looked up and she held my gaze. There was sadness in her expression, an ache I had seen before but never quite understood. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. It was in that look. Quiet understanding. A mourning of something unspoken. And somehow I knew. The secret Grandpa carried, it wouldn't stay buried forever. Grandpa Gus's health kept declining. One night, as he coughed uncontrollably, I sat beside his bed, holding his frail hand in mine. His breath was shallow, each wheeze sounding like it cost him effort. Then, in a raspy whisper, he said, "Orion, don't believe everything you see on the surface. When I'm gone, go to that place." "What place, Grandpa?" I asked, my heart pounding. He gripped my hand tighter. "You'll know. Just remember, you're the only one I trust." Before I could ask more, Grandma Colette entered the room, carrying a glass of warm water. She gave me a gentle look and a slight shake of the head, signaling not to push him further. I nodded, swallowing my questions. But his words stayed with me, burning like a quiet flame in the back of my mind. He passed away on a calm, gray morning. I was there, sitting beside him, feeling the warmth fade from his hand as he took his final breath. Grandma stood beside us, not crying, just slowly stroking his white hair. She was stronger than I expected. "Your grandfather lived a long life, Orion," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "And he loved you more than anyone else." I nodded, tears falling freely, but even as grief welled up inside me, his final words echoed louder than the silence in the room. "Don't believe what you see on the surface. Go to that place." The funeral was held on a cold, rainy day in Bruges. My entire family showed up, dressed in black, but none of them seemed truly affected. My father wore a sleek black suit and looked like he had somewhere else to be. Uncle Hugo whispered to a man I didn't recognize, probably talking business. My cousins, Victor, Camille, and Elise, were glued to their phones, barely glancing up. Only my mother sat quietly beside me, holding my hand. Her eyes were red but dry, her expression unreadable. Grandma Colette sat at the front, just in front of the casket. She stared at the framed photograph of Grandpa in his younger years, her gaze distant, as if looking through time itself. A few days later, the family was summoned by Grandpa's attorney, Monsieur Bernard Leclerc, to hear the reading of the will. Leclerc was a slender, graying man in his 50s, with the kind of voice that made every word feel carefully weighed. His office was nestled in the heart of Bruges, lined with dark wooden bookshelves filled with legal volumes, and anchored by a long, polished table that seemed to hum with quiet authority. Everyone showed up, and the air was thick with unspoken greed. My father took the seat at the head of the table, eyes sharp, jaw tense. Uncle Hugo checked his watch repeatedly, as though he had far more important things waiting. My cousins whispered and snickered like it was Christmas morning and they were about to open presents. I sat silently, watching, waiting, and still hearing Grandpa's voice. "You'll know. Just remember, you're the only one I trust." Claire opened the will. Mr. Gus had divided his estate into fragments, bits of savings, a few sentimental trinkets scattered among the grandchildren. No one looked satisfied. A frown curled on Victor's face as he leaned forward. "That's it," he muttered. Then Leclerc adjusted his glasses and turned his eyes to me. "Miss Orion Dubois is bequeathed property number 1417 and €10. For a moment, the room went silent. Then it erupted in laughter. Victor jabbed a finger in my direction. "Property 1417? What is that? A pile of moldy books." Camille covered her mouth, giggling. €10? The old man had a sense of humor, I'll give him that. My father gave me a look of pure contempt. Uncle Hugo let out a sharp, derisive snort. I sat there, feeling the ground open beneath my feet. I never cared much for money. But this felt like a deliberate insult. Why would Grandpa leave me something so meaningless? Claire offered no further explanation. just a curt nod in my direction, as if that was the end of it. I left the office in a daze. The rain had begun to fall hard, soaking through my coat by the time I reached the street. I walked without thinking, aimless, hollow, as if my limbs moved by instinct alone. That night, I visited Madame Colette. She was seated by her window, knitting in the soft glow of a single lamp. When she saw my face, she stopped mid-stitch, placed a warm hand over mine. "Orion," she said gently, "your grandfather never did anything without reason. If he chose you, then trust there's something to find." From the pocket of her cardigan, she pulled out a small brass key, aged and worn smooth. "Go to the old house, Orion," she whispered. "You'll understand what he meant for you to know." I took the key, my heart suddenly racing in my chest. "The old house? You mean property 1417? She nodded, her eyes full of something I couldn't name, memory, maybe, or secrets too heavy to say aloud. "You'll know when you get there. Trust your grandfather. And trust yourself." By the weekend, I had tracked down the address. 1417 Ancient Road. It was on the outskirts of Bruges, near the River Laye, a quiet, overgrown stretch I'd never paid attention to before. The house loomed into view through a curtain of mist, old timber walls weathered by time, a sagging roof, broken windows, and weeds climbing like fingers across the stone steps. It looked like something pulled straight from a horror film. I tried the key. It didn't fit. But the door, so brittle with age, gave way with a simple push. A long, low creak groaned through the silence as I stepped inside. Darkness swallowed everything. The air was thick with dust and the unmistakable scent of mildew. I turned on my phone's flashlight, the weak beam cutting across forgotten furniture, collapsed shelves, and years of abandonment. I searched. Room by room, I examined every inch, tapped on walls, lifted rugs, opened drawers lined with mouse droppings and faded photographs. Nothing. After nearly an hour, frustration settled in. I was close to giving up. And then my heel caught on something odd. Near the fireplace, a floorboard felt hollow beneath my step. I crouched down and pried it up. Beneath it was a metal hatch, embedded into the foundation, with a combination lock at its center. My pulse thundered in my ears. Without thinking, I looked at the 10-euro note. I hadn't tossed it, it had stayed in my coat pocket, crumpled and forgotten. I flattened it out under the flashlight. The serial number stared back at me. J1417K89632. I entered it into the lock. Click. The hatch popped open with a hiss of released air, dust puffing upward into my face. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from something else entirely. Anticipation. Fear. Awe. He had led me here. The air in the basement was thick with damp and dust, but my heart was pounding too hard for me to care. I entered the final digits, 8963, into the safe style. The mechanism clicked and the door creaked open. Inside were three things: a bundle of leather-bound documents, a black notebook, and a sleek silver USB stick. I reached for the notebook first. Cover was worn, the pages brittle. My grandfather's familiar handwriting scrawled across every line, dates, coordinates, strange code names. There were maps of Eastern Europe, tactical notes, operations labeled Blue Horizon and Shadow Sustain. One page in particular froze me. Berlin, March 12, 1978, met Kay at rendezvous. Betrayal successful. Taped beside it was a photo. A much younger version of Grandpa Gus stood in a crisp suit beside a man in military uniform. The caption underneath read, "Operation Blue Horizon MI6. I stared. Me 6? My grandfather, the man who taught me to tie my shoes, who smelled like mint tea and old wood, who wore torn cardigans and debated history with passion, had been a British intelligence officer? I flipped through more pages. There were signed government seals, official language, dossiers. The name Gustave Laurent, codename Hawk. He had coordinated spy networks across Eastern Europe between 1974 and 1988. I was already overwhelmed when I turned to the metal box. Inside was a thinner file, labeled with two names that made my breath catch: Marcel and Hugo. My father. My uncle. Pages detailed bank transfers, fraudulent property transactions, and dozens of forged documents. At the top, Gus had scrawled in his sharp pen, MC and HC suspected of laundering money through Light of Tomorrow Charity Fund, 2018 to 2023. There were copies of emails, receipts, hidden accounts, and beneath all of it, a letter handwritten. Orion, if you're reading this, you've found the basement. I'm sorry for the weight I've placed on you. I lived two lives, the one your family knew and the one the world could never know. But the deepest wound was discovering what my sons became. I couldn't turn them in. They're my blood. But you must choose. The USB contains a video. I explain everything. If they still have a chance to redeem themselves, give it to them. But if they don't, do the right thing. I trust you. Gus, I didn't remember how I got out of the basement. My body moved on instinct. But my mind was a whirlwind of grief, betrayal, duty. I took the files, the USB, the notebook, and made only one call: Professor Klaus Muller, a Cold War historian at the university. He met me in his office, eyes wide as I spread the documents out. After an hour, he looked up. These are real. Gustave Laurent was no ordinary man. He was significant. I waited until the weekend to confront my father and uncle. We met at their company office. They expected something about family, but I laid the documents on the table like a quiet explosion. My father's face went pale. Uncle Hugo's hands trembled. But then came the rage. You would bring this filth into our house, my father barked. This betrayal. I just want you to stop, I said calmly. To fix this before it's too late. But they didn't want to fix it. They wanted silence. They wanted me to disappear. So I went to Leclerc. He was an old friend of Grandpa Gus, a retired lawyer, discreet and fiercely principled. I gave him everything. The files, the USB, my statement. He passed them to the authorities and a trusted journalist. A week later, the headline broke across Belgium. Dubois and Sons under investigation for fraud and money laundering. Company collapsed within days. Subpoenas, investigations, public outrage. My family called me a traitor. My cousins blocked me. My uncles spat my name. To my father, he sent me a single message: "You've destroyed us." But my mother, she came to see me, tear-streaked and silent. She didn't say much, just held my hand and whispered, "You did what he couldn't." Then Leclerc contacted me again. There was a second part of Gus's will, sealed, not to be revealed until the truth was brought to light. He had amassed a fortune, hundreds of millions, smart investments over decades, all hidden, and he left it to me, on one condition, that I use it to create a foundation for children in need of education. So I did. I registered the Gustave Laurent Foundation, bought an old mansion in Bruges, and transformed it into a school and museum. We built classrooms, funded scholarships, hired the best teachers from across Europe. And on the second floor, I opened an exhibition titled The Secret History of an Ordinary Man, featuring the life, maps, and journals of the man once known as Hawk. Tourists came in droves. Students from poor towns came with wide eyes. And for the first time in my life, I felt not just useful, but whole. Gus wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was a legacy. 1 year later, I took Grandma Colette to the park near the exhibition. She held my hand and said softly, "Your grandfather would be proud of you, Orion." My family never forgave me, but I have no regrets. Gus taught me that truth, no matter how painful, is always worth fighting for. His legacy wasn't just money or secrets, but trust, integrity, and a hope for a better world. I live by that lesson every single day, even if the whole world turns against me. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more real, powerful family drama stories like this one.